So I would like to introduce our panel and our discussion today. Our discussion will be looking at public spaces, and we will look at it from three main kind of point of views. We have esteemed guests today. I will be coordinating with this panel together with Gregor Thomsen.
Yeah, good morning and welcome. Looking very much forward to hear all your inputs today and for a good discussion.
Yes. Gregor and I have a practice called Superpool based in Istanbul and in Copenhagen. We have been working together on public spaces in these last 15 years. So we have a passion around how complex actually the public spaces are. And we have the honor of having today's discussion together on both kind of unpacking this complexity, how do we, and then hopefully trying to establish some principles of what makes resilient and inclusive public spaces. So that will be our focus. We will try to make it productive. At the end of hopefully 90 minutes, we will have some principles we would like to distill from these presentations we will listen to together. Our first presentation will be from Alp. Alp is the founder of Urban.koop. He's an architect and an urban designer. Also has a long experience with preservation with Çekil work. Second presentation will be from Alexis. Alexis is also an architect and a city designer. She's from the US, but has been living in Istanbul for 20 years. And working on a lot of public space projects. We collaborate a lot. Thank you for being here, both Alp and Alexis. And our last guest is from the Netherlands. It's Ian. Ian is leading a small revolution in Rotterdam and beyond on changing the public spaces, especially school courtyards, into green and blue infrastructure pieces. So he will also share this experience with us. So I hope throughout this panel we can discuss public spaces from a kind of disaster point of view, from resilience in terms of social resilience, economic resilience, and also climate resilience. And again, we would like to make sure that we distill some principles out of these conversations. We will try to lead it quite organically. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. If you want to come closer, you're welcome to come closer. We would really like to run this as a conversation as much as possible. So with all this, I will leave the word first to Alp. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody once again. So I'm going to be talking about the relationship between public space and post-disaster response. But in the beginning, I need to admit that our experience with post-disaster response is very much started in February. Although we have been working on public space, we have started to think about post-disaster response after the Kahramanmaraş earthquake. And we have been trying to bring together a design guideline for temporary settlements which have been settled in the disaster area in Turkey. So I'm going to talk about that experience a little bit and what we learned about that. And I will jump directly to the conclusion and tell the two main lessons we have learned throughout this design guideline experience. So, first of all, is it possible to, can I?
Yeah, okay.
No, okay, it's there. Okay. So the first lesson we learned is that post-disaster response has to start before the disaster. That should be a basic thing, but maybe in the case of Turkey, it should be reminded again. So people gather in places which they are used to gathering, and that has evidence in many studies around the world. So, and that interface is public spaces. People gather around in public spaces, so public spaces, they have to be designed before the disaster in order to get ready for the post-disaster scenarios. The second main thing is post-disaster relief efforts are not focused on rebuilding cities. It's focused on rebuilding communities. So the communities are rebuilding cities. So our main target should be rebuilding the communities again. And in order to rebuild communities, we need public interaction. So public spaces are the main interface of community building. Therefore, I'm going to talk about this two main lessons and how we achieved and the journey we went through while achieving these two results, let's say. So let's lay the ground. In a post-disaster scenario, okay, there are two main response styles. One of them is top-down decision-making, is government-led responses, and one of them is community-driven response, which is bottom-up responses. I'm just going to talk about both of them. And the first one is very important in the emergency scenario, in the emergency response scenarios, and the second one is very important in the long-term scenarios for the recovery efforts. So, as I say, in a government-led scenario, we need to be prepared before the disaster. So, the calendar of disaster relief starts before the disaster 0 point. And we have the public spaces available. And these public spaces, while during the design, they should be prepared for a disaster scenario. And that is kind of basic information. But let's say morphology of public spaces, they differ from city to city, and the way we use public spaces are different in every city. So throughout the urban design, these spaces become places for shelter, for emergency shelter, not temporary housing, but emergency shelters. They become the basic ground for the emergency infrastructure like little hospitals or food delivery points. These are the centers for information, the centers for gathering, and the centers for reaching to clean water. So, as I say, like all through the, from Japan to Kathmandu, from Chile to Mexico to Italy, all empirical findings show that when in a disaster scenario, you go to a gathering place that you have already been using before the disaster. So we are automatically have the tendency to gather in the places that we are used to gather. Therefore, the public space in the city is the ground for already a ground for disaster relief efforts. Now, this has a lot of lessons to learn about design, which I'm not going to get into. How we can prepare the infrastructure for design, how we can use the landscape as an edible landscape, how we can use the tree canopy as a shelter. So it has a lot of design findings, which maybe we can go into detail in questions or further discussion. But I want to focus more about the community-driven responses, which is more important for us, for example. Like in countries where the top-down decision-making sometimes struggles in crisis scenarios, the civil initiatives and the informal civic society leads the response efforts. And in emergency, we have all experienced that, right? Because the civic society mobilizes really quickly, and community is usually leading the efforts for restructuring and also the emergency responses. So I'm just going to focus more about this community-led response and how it's connected with public space as an interface for interaction. Now, after the earthquake, communities lose most of their resources. They lose their structural, like built resources, the houses, and they lose their job, work. But the last resource people have in a crisis scenario is the social resources. So social resources and social capital is a really good place to start for relief efforts, because that is the resource that we can work on and we can accumulate. And that resource can be turned into other things. It can turn into work, and it can actually, in the long term, make the city rebuild again, make the urban life rebuild again. So, I'm sorry, I have a problem with the presentation, which is not super important, actually. I can skip without the presentation. But that's okay, yeah. After the earthquake, we were all thinking about how to rebuild the cities. You know, that was the main discussion in the public sphere. But so the response was rebuilding the houses, not the temporary houses, but the permanent housing. And the temporary settlements were it seemed to the public like they were going to be there for a couple of months and people are going to move to new city. But temporary housing is not like that. Temporary housing, even the word temporary has a lot of debate on it, because usually after disasters, people live for maybe tens of years in temporary housing. If you live in a place for 10 years, that's not temporary anymore. So that is housing. It's not temporary housing. So people go to school there. People start working there. People start rebuilding their community. And when you see the layout of temporary housing, it's just in a very rigid grid plan with housing units next to each other, with narrow streets. The layout is for emergency response. It's not for rebuilding a community or rebuilding the urban life. But post-disaster scenario, our aim, as I say, is not rebuilding just the city, the buildings, but the urban life. So the design question here is not the design of housing. The design of housing is kind of, it has a very accepted mathematics, but the main design problem is redesigning the public space, because that public space is the main interface of interaction of communities between each other. This is where you have the solidarity of the communities. This is where you build the social capacity. This is where you get in touch with the wider civil society, because after the earthquake, national and international civil society wants to help to communities, and these public spaces in temporary settlements, they create an interface for bridging local survivors and the wider civil society. So in both terms of creating links between communities and between civil society and communities, the public space is the main design problem of temporary settlements in a post-disaster scenario. I was planning to show some examples, actually, but if this works. That's just okay. It's really not that important, but the visuals were not important. If you could see the visuals, I was going to say, like, the public space has a hierarchy in between. You have small courtyards, you have little streets, and you have big city squares. So it's like there's always a hierarchy between public spaces. that hierarchy is also represented in a post-disaster scenario. For example, big public squares are very much can be associated with a government-led response, where you can set hospitals or temporary schools or food delivery services. So they have to be flexible and they have to be centralized. But where community flourishes is the small public spaces. So there's a hierarchy in between. And I was just going to show some examples from Kathmandu, which a big earthquake has occurred in 2015, and the urban layout of Kathmandu is based on courtyards in different forms and hierarchies. So there are small courtyards for the families, there are bigger courtyards for the communities, there are bigger courtyards for more in urban scale, let's say. And after the earthquake, there was little to no government response for the earthquake, and these courtyards were the basic areas where we have seen community-driven response in different scales, from bigger squares to little courtyards. And that hierarchy can be applied to post-disaster temporary settlements and in general response, because, as I say, when people gather around a public sphere where they have the feeling of belonging, the community is built up more quickly, and we see that displacement is less in such kind of scenarios. I'm telling this based on empirical studies again all around the world. So people can build up faster in a community-driven place where they can share. As these were some examples from the workshops we have done about how to reinvent the public space in a temporary settlement scenario.
Thank you.
So I think my time is up, so I can, basically I said the most important things that I wanted to say. Yeah. Maybe we can continue in the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alp. I think it's, and for sure we will get back to you, right, in the discussion with all of us. I think it's just extremely important that we keep our focus on what public space serves as and the different scales of it. So even as we think of our cities today, right, that there are so many layers of information and needs that we need to think of these spaces that they need to accommodate.
Thank you, Alp. I was taking notes, and I think you gave us 4 very critical principles. One was about that post-disaster response starts before the disaster. I think the second note I took was about that people go back to places that they're familiar with. So public space actually serves a role throughout our lifetime, that we keep going back to it in terms of disaster, in terms of celebration, etc. And then the third principle I think you gave us was around social capital, and that the importance of creating social capital in cities, and how, as designers, we can contribute to that, I think is a very important question to raise. And then the last point I took a note of was around the hierarchy of spaces, especially the medium-sized spaces and what they do for communities. And I think that ties very nicely with what Alexis is going to share with us now. Again, I think our effort here on this deep dive is to look at public space from a crisis perspective, in some ways, a resilience perspective. So we talked about disaster now, but we will also talk about economic crisis, a social kind of resilience, and we will talk about climate as an issue of resilience building. So thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Alp.
Hello. I'm really looking forward to contributing to this panel and the discussion. And I will try to frame a bit that pre-planning, the agility. How do we create agile systems? How do we create systems that can recalibrate? I moved to Istanbul 20 years ago, And as a city designer, it's been an amazing place for me to understand resilience of a city that's 2,000 years old. And one of the practices I find most interesting in resilience is the markets, the one-day markets that have probably been going on for over 1,000 years. If I told you I could build you a 40,000 square meter place and trade $1 million+ or whatever currency you're in a day, and it can go up and come down with no impact, you would tell me I was crazy. But this happens daily in Istanbul. Okay. And these systems recalibrate. They move. They can change. As the land changes, they change. As the terrain changes, they change. And they happen all over the city. So it has a redundancy. One of the big things with resiliency is redundancy. That it's not necessarily always top-down and bottom-up, but the ability to recalibrate. And the evenness of these systems was fascinating to me. In 2011, our practice was asked to do Shoshone Park, which is a public land that is a residual from Tarlabaşı Road that broke through in about the 40s and 50s and broke up this park. You can still see the park. You can see its relationship to the Haliç, the park that remains on that side of the highway, the pieces of land in between. And this was going to become a large transit hub that connected 3 forms of transportation and a public park that looked over the city. When we finished, one of our big dreams was that this would become a place for event economy. There wasn't a very established residential neighborhood in the immediate blocks, but just below in Kasımpaşa and just behind in Beyoğlu was a very large residential district, and there was a big entertainment economy surrounding the site. We thought it would be a great laboratory for the city to test public programs, and we designed the space for this purpose. So the upper level, which you can, sorry, I guess I have to stand to have a pointer. The upper level was designed to always be open program for people to look out and spill out to the city, where the lower space is exactly the size of the courtyards that are very common throughout Istanbul's Külliye systems, and could hold 1,000 people standing or 200 people to do concerts. And the immediate year that we opened, the Design Week used it, and this picture shows how the Design Week used it. It was supposed to be operated by IBB, and the underside was to have a public market that connected to Zemin Istanbul, an incubation center along the metro line. Oops. We worked with the city to develop a series of programs and how to make these places. Like Alp says, people go to places, they don't go to parts of cities. So you need to name the place. So this is the courtyard in Shoshone Park. This is the market at. These are very important to give names to places. Immediately, we also found the things that we suggested as daily programs. Just watching the sunset is a public program. This pattern that people make in their daily lives builds the type of trust capital, coming together in community, even if you're amongst strangers. We also found that just creating places allowed people to have a new imagination of how they could occupy public space and be more playful in it. And we also found the most interesting thing is that nonprofit groups did come around and start using it. This was the running clubs, and the running clubs used to start meeting here in the morning and doing a whole series of activities and create an entire economy in themselves around just having access to a public space that they could use. We also see this a lot in small micro projects that Superpool's leading for street transformations. Just by programming the public space, like placemaking has defined for the last 30 years, you create that pattern, that activity. Every day after school, people come, they meet, they talk. But also that creates an economy around that pattern too. And that microeconomy allows for small enterprises to thrive without, they would not have an audience or a market. And it is simple. Sometimes it's just defining the place and inviting people. The suggestion of it is often enough. And you can see, even in these microspaces, people come together and they find new and inventive ways to use their city. And we need to encourage that imagination. A lot of why things don't happen is people can't imagine it's possible. And this is not just the citizens. The engineers can't imagine, the mayors can't imagine. It's actually this idea of imagining different possibilities is part of our role as architects. And I have the same thing. I go to a site, and I couldn't imagine that this was possible. Really, you see what's there, and you see what's possible, and it's just by acting. We also know that we have to work with many. So the sociologists have done pioneering work on why social infrastructure matters. Why do libraries, why do schools, why do these public infrastructure matter? Because they create the institutional presence and the placemaking. These places is what engenders that social capital, that trust capital, the sense of where to go when you need resiliency. And they provide those daily resources and questions. The economists are also pioneering this thinking with both the circular economy that's very popular, but I particularly find Kate, I'm going to say her last name wrong, so donut economy, very, very exciting because she makes it very explicit. We have a finite amount of resources ecologically to build from, and we have to embellish those resources. But within that is also the inner circle is us as social creatures and the things that we need to thrive. And then if we can find a balance economically where those are giving a gratuitous loop to each other, we can find a very interesting balanced economy. But that is a very big shift from modern economics that focuses always on growth, not on capacity. There's a long list of literature on placemaking that I will not go into, which is basically just taking place and adding programs to create that emotional and cultural experience that we think of when we go to public spaces and have cultural experiences like concerts or events or talks. And there is a number of new trends that are happening that are talking about this agility, that this top-down planning, it has its purpose, but we need new tools and systems, and these are not going to be found in academic journals or in conferences. These are going to be found on the streets and tools that we can get into our hands. We've also been working on this a lot, is how can we empower citizens? We cannot ask citizens to participate in the design of public space without giving them a base of knowledge. This is not fair. We have done this for medicine. We have made sure that every third grader knows their circulatory system, about nutrition. We need to do the same thing. We need to go into our schools and have people understand how to use their city, how to participate in cities, and empower that language and give them the rhetoric that they can do and participate with the engineers and everybody else. And that needs to be playful. We need to be excited. We need to have fun. It can't be like taking your medicine. So I'm going to introduce a new thing we're working on, which is this idea of the event making, that often we need to come up with ways that people go to places and they do things. And those things are used to be called third spaces, but we actually need to be, they're not third, they're primary to our lives. They're part of our identity. They're part of our third identity. They're part of our first identity. And those events actually have a subtlety. Some of them are very big, some are very small, some are individual. Some of them require coordination with bigger institutions. And they're quite diverse when we start really diving into it. And these have a diversity of audiences, ages, interests, communities of interest, skill levels, and it's doing things together that builds community and doing things together in places that we share. So if we're doing all of our hobbies at home, we're missing out on the opportunity to create our cultural production and the things we are excited about with our neighbors, or even better, with the global world that we live in. So I just also want to point out that we can't underestimate that this event economy often doesn't happen because it does also not have the event infrastructure. If you want 50 people showing up every Sunday morning to do something, you do. You need restrooms. If you want it to be a food event, you need places for the people to wash their hands. If you want it to be something that happens in the rain, you need to have a relief of that. You need energy sources. So actually a lot of things aren't happening in public spaces because we're planning for them only as a very old-fashioned idea of public space, not as an enabler of social enterprise and economic enterprise. We've been working with mayors to help us reimagine with them what we can do with the public spaces and how this can build public programs, but also social enterprise and economic inclusion. That lots of these programs are run by individuals, by NGOs or by collectives that have, this is their way and their platform to make a living. And that can support families, and that can support younger and older people. And what we've been finding is that the infrastructure that's the most exciting to work on is not what you expect. It's actually all the small shops that we engage in the street life. It is the public markets that have kind of, the AVME and planning has demoted to civil space rather than keeping it a civic space. And we call this new softer spaces, the event economy spaces, as kind of settings within public space. And one of the things we find is that the shops are private, right? These are privately run shops, they're in private property. So that's one type of organization. The markets are public spaces, and they're usually publicly run or at least subsidized. And then you have the event economy that is actually kind of agilely using both sides of that. And so we got particularly interested in the latter two of how you can use these soft settings with these marketplaces. And to kind of articulate that, to bring it, I often find very explicit examples help, is a market that we worked with Kütahya Belediye for their public market renewal. And this is what they wanted, a public market with 150 tables and everything else. But we said, well, but don't you do all these other things? And wouldn't it be wonderful if you could actually use this as a kind of economic driver to bring people back into the city center? It's a very big expense and investment in capital improvements. And we said, well, why don't you do community markets, right? Why don't you invite the people from around the region to have a different type of market and sell goods, a secondhand market, a food market? What if you do your iftar dinners there? Or what if you allow wedding celebrations to happen there? And then you can rent it over that space. Or what if you have sports events coming there? Like you have the high school there, you have the middle school. We're about to hear how to open our public school grounds, but it's also, we can use these parks to bring people that maybe not in school, right? Like, older or younger to participate in sports as a community. Or we can just have great parties. Like there is also a desire to go out and socialize and be part of that. And all of that has this really interesting effervescence to bring economic possibility. For example, like the Kestane gentleman having another market at night, or somebody who's interested in making festive things, they can also share their expertise. This is also true for public space in plazas, working with mayors to talk about what you can do in public space. You need to create a calendar. What we know from cultural centers is that you need a calendar to make that happen. It is the pattern of going to the same place that was highlighted before. It's the naming. You know that when you go there on Tuesday in April, the first Tuesday of every April is going to celebrate the coming of such and such. Or every Sunday morning there is X. And then you can start designing, as you can see in here, the places that will support those activities. So you can have, different evening activities and daily things. You can have big celebrations like the New Year's events or, festival. You can have they have a cherry festival where we set up a bunch of, informal stations around to let people have more like a fair for that festival. Or you can have Children's Day or Recreation Day where you're inviting everybody to come out to this really interesting agricultural landscape that is quite vast, but then have a gathering space afterwards. So we have these principles that we have been learning. The time-based uses, although they seem temporary, but they're not. They create urban form. Because if you go to the same place, we can't say that Çarşamba Pazarı is not a permanent place. It's been there for 100 years. Clearly, everybody knows it. It is a form in itself. That these places create, these experiences in events, create civic landmarks, actually. It is the experience that's the landmark, not the object. And the last one, which I can't read that far. We love to play. We love to play as children. We love to play as adults. We love to play together. We build trust capital when we play together. And playing just means going out and having fun. It's, it's just socializing with others and finding new ways, and play allows for an imagination. So, So coming back, this is all about people and enabling people. As I said, when you have a disaster, when you have an economic crisis, what we need to do is enable those people to quickly get back into what they're good at, what they can establish, what they can re-network, to build and take care of their families. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexis. I think I have a long list of principles, but maybe just to name a few of them is that we need to have ability to recalibrate our spaces or the programs that go in there. We need to make sure that they have public programming. We need to make sure that these spaces actually become landmarks in our cities and we know where they are. And I'm sure Selva has an even longer list.
Well, thank you so much. I have. I think it helped for me to reframe the conversation from, in some ways, resilience to planning for agility. I think that for me was an interesting reframing, and so thank you for that. And I was also, when you expanded upon that, saying agility relies on redundancy, so that you need to have redundant systems actually for agility to work. So yes, you need the top-down and the bottom-up, and actually you need multiple layers of that to create that agility. I think that's, for me, was nice rethinking, and I think that's why we have this panel also of layering different needs in public space to create those different redundancies. I think the other thing that I took a note for myself as a designer or architect is yes, that role of encouraging imagination lies with all of us in this room, and I think that's the hardest work in some ways, I think, to have the courage to imagine. I think that will tie very nicely with the work that Ian is doing. Even in the setting of the Netherlands, where it almost looks, it's already perfect, it's not, so that you do still need that extra layer of imagination. And please, Ian, we're looking forward to seeing your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for your introduction. And I would like to start with some imagination. And I would like to ask you to close your eyes. And you are 5, 6 years, and I would like to ask you to imagine what you are doing at that age. Your holiday starts, it's a summer day, you go outside. What were you doing? Okay, who wants to tell us what you were doing, seeing, feeling? Who dares? Otherwise, I will show on. Do you dare? Yeah?
Riding a bicycle.
And where did you do that?
In Antalya.
Okay, nice. Someone else? Can I ask you? I'm sorry.
Sunny beach, I think I was imagining.
Okay. Yeah. What were you doing there?
I was just relaxing. Yes.
Really important?
So playing on a dead-end street with the friends. So yeah.
What were you doing?
I think we were playing alone, riding bikes. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, I have not much time, so I would like to go on, but many times when I ask this question, no one talks about structures who are built for play. And many children play together. What I see a lot, many stories about the youth of children is about playing with friends, playing in nature, playing with some risks, sometimes doing some forbidden things. And when you talk with parents or professionals, they are afraid for risks, for claims, etc. So there's a paradox between life of children and the responsibilities of adults. So I think it's a good starting point, and that's the starting point I start with the municipality in Rotterdam, but we're now also talking with the province and ministries about this. And I would like to start from the child perspective. Many places where children play are like this, stony or just plastic stuff, and when there's some nature, it's like this. Children can walk on the grass, but don't touch the flowers, please, etc. But it's not really natural. It's not the natural play of children. So there's also a paradox. Oh, I'm sorry. We organized a subsidy in Rotterdam for the children in the most crowded neighborhoods. And many times those neighborhoods are also have some issues with climate and biodiversity. And we select them. And I can show you some more about the selection process. 50% is like a top-down policy. We focus on data about how many children live in neighborhoods, how many problems with climate, with water, with heat, health issues, etc. But the other 50% is bottom-up. The schools and the parents and the children has to tell us their motivation. And when we think they are ready for it, they can start the whole concept. Not just a part. When you participate, you have to do the whole concept. Now here you can see something about the climate in the city. The city is more and more crowded now, and here you can see what also the little school grounds everywhere in the city can help some climate issues. And here you can also see the selection of schools. You see different maps, but when you put the maps over each other, you can see much of the data is quite the same. We focus on the water, the heat, but also poverty, health issues, and many of those are in the same neighborhoods. So in first instance, we focus on those neighborhoods, but at the end, in 2030, we would like to have done all schools. And this afternoon, I'm also talking with the Ministry of the Netherlands about all school buildings until 2050. Many school buildings have to be done, built more sustainable. So we would like to organize some program of requirements. It's not alone about the building, but also about the nature around it, and also for climate issues, but also for the community issues. And here you can see where we looking for at the schools. It's really important schools has a vision about outdoor education, a vision about community building and open access to their school ground. And it's also really important to have a good team inside the school. And we also looking for teams with teachers, but also with people from the community and children, of course. Children must be involved in the whole process. And we also look for the maintenance. Every time the same issues are there, and you can fix it in the beginning, like you said, organize it before you start. Oh, no. Okay. Now here I will go quickly through this, but in the whole process, every time adults have a problem about danger or claims or whatever, we tell them, no, we take responsibility for the children and the nature. They don't have any voice, so we have to take responsibility for them. And many children play like this. They take the flowers and make soup with flowers and mud, or they like to climb on things, and they like it to play with water. They like it to climb in trees. They like it to play with loose parts. They like it to build huts with friends or sometimes with their parents. They like to hide and seek through the nature. But it's also a really good part for climate issue. And what we also see is a growing gap between children or people and nature. Cities are more dense and there's less nature, so we don't take care for nature anymore. Now here you can see the process. It's really important to start with a view, and we talk with the children, with the teachers and with the parents about the benefits of this concept for the health of children, the community building, but also for the climate and biodiversity issues. And the children like it. They are involved, they are taken seriously, and they are developing their own places. So the community building starts with making plans together. And we also stimulate outdoor education. Many children are sitting inside all day, and it's also really unhealthy, and many children also learn like another way than only sitting with a book. And here you can see how we design with the children, and they're developing their own space. And what I like about this, we organize it a bit top-down, but most of all bottom-up. And they are organizing their own space, so they become also the owner. And they also would like to do the maintenance. And they take care for those places. So the investment in the beginning is a bit more than normally, but after that you can go away and they take care of it. Here you see some activities for the neighborhood. And what also is nice, it's not only for the children of the school, it's not only for the parents of the school, but what I see is also people from other neighborhoods come to school grounds to relax and to meet other people. And we also have a lot of challenges. What I would like to do more is organize programming for the youngest children to have a good, healthy start. So the first 1,000 days we are developing some more programs to get the families to the playgrounds. There's also a lot of pressure on space. We see a lot of small houses, big families, so the pressure on the outdoor space is big. So sometimes you also have to program something. I like it most when children can go out without parents, so they also have some nice experiences. But after that, some youngest children or some more vulnerable people of children will not go outside, so we have to program that. Outdoor education is really difficult. Also there, in school time, there's a lot of pressure on the school grounds, so we also need the parks behind in the neighborhood. Scaling is also a difficult part. What we see through the whole Netherlands is it's really important to have a good process leader. And many schools are experiencing by themselves how to organize or develop the designing or the opening, the open access or the outdoor education. But there are many experiences already. So we have to share it, but we have to scale it. We have to give a lot of training courses to the schools, teachers, but also municipalities. And what I also see, it's really difficult to organize a system change in policy. When you walk outside as a child or as a family, it's really normal to see a green space, a little park, also as a shelter for climate issues. But in Paris, it's also for when there's a terrorist attack. It's also a climate it's also a shelter place. Now we try to bring some ministries together. And that's really difficult. And I can show you the next slide. When you invest one time, you can have benefits at least 3 times, but I think maybe 6 times. But it's really difficult because of the policy is, for example, many times the investment comes from the climate issues, but the benefits are also on health. But the health policy will not invest in the school grounds. So it's really difficult to organize an integral program. At the school level it works, but at the national level, it's really difficult to organize that. So we are working on that, and we have some things to do. And at the end, I would like to, here's some last pictures. And playing with water and mud, children like it a lot. And I would like to show you a short video.
They will start it.
Yeah, super, thanks.
We zien allemaal mooie planten. We hebben dit samen met onze groep gecreëerd en ook met de andere klassen. En het is best wel mooi geworden.
Dit is ons nieuwe plein, een nieuw plein van Kindcentrum De Vlinder. Wij hebben dat van de gemeente in beheer gekregen. En daardoor konden wij het middenstuk van het plein helemaal zelf inrichten. Dat hebben we gedaan samen met de kinderen en samen met buurtbewoners. En ja, de kinderen wilden zand, wilden modder, wilden water. En de buurt wilde graag bloemen en planten en dat het er mooi uitzag.
Je bent hier in Dordrecht op het groen-blauwe schoolplein van de basisschool. Het plein was hiervoor helemaal betegeld. Er was niks aan. Er werd dus vooral veel gerend en ook wel aardig wat onrust heerste er dan. Gewoon dat kinderen zich verveelden. We hadden heel veel plassen in de herfst en in de winter op het plein. Toen hebben we met het schoolpleinadvies een plan gemaakt, ook met de kinderen samen, van wat hebben we nodig, wat vinden we leuk, wat willen we graag op het plein. We hebben nu dus een klimaatadaptief plein. Er gebeuren meer lessen buiten, dus we hebben een insectenhotel, er komt een moestuin.
We zijn op het schoolplein van de Margrietschool in Rotterdam, in Blijdorp. Nou, mijn zoontje 7 die zit hier op school, maar we wonen hier ook om de hoek. Dus ook na schooltijd gaat hij heel vaak met kinderen uit de buurt, met zijn buurjongens hier naartoe om hier lekker te spelen. En ik ben er eigenlijk zelf ook regelmatig.
Ze wanen zich echt in de natuur. En dat is ook eigenlijk de bedoeling dat kinderen op het schoolplein ook in een natuurlijke omgeving zitten.
Eerst was het gewoon hier oud hier en dan alleen maar glijbaan en de klimrek. Dus dat vonden wij het niet zo leuk en groen staat mooier bij overal. Dus daarom vonden we het beter. Gewoon verbeteren, net als ons. Heel veel groen en minder stenen.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you. I think how I see it is that actually you are sort of building capacity in this future generation to hopefully take better care of themselves, but also our planet, right? So thank you very much for investing in those little guys that will take over what we left behind.
Thank you. And I was also adding to my list of principles. I think sort of the awareness between play and risk-taking is one thing. I think that applies to a lot of things in public life, not just only children's play, but also risk as a component of public life and how we still facilitate for play within that. The other two notes I had is being the voice for those who don't have a voice, so be that children or climate. I think that is an important role and principle to remember. And then the data-driven decision-making together with also community engagement. I think there is always a healthy balance of prioritizing needs, but also while prioritizing that, incorporating the voice of communities. I'm standing up to be able to better see the room, to encourage you to ask questions. I think we are now in our last 35 minutes. But where I would really hope we have a more open conversation around. I think both these principles as one theme we can continue discussing what are principles, what did we hear from each other. I will ask you all also to ask questions to each other or highlight things that were valuable to you. And I think the other key question that we would like to discuss is the scaling up, what Ian brought up at the end. How do we create both the capacity within our practices and our networking, like in these sort of events with MARUF? How do we come together as professionals who have these agendas? And also, how do we, where do we see potentials for leveraging better public spaces, resilient public spaces? How do we get there? But I think either question is equally valid. I think the principles are valid to discuss, and also scaling up is valid to discuss. Are there any burning questions in the room?
Thank you for all sharing your expertise and this beautiful presentation. I would like to ask Mr. Ian that, can you please elaborate how did you manage to calculate the benefits of these parks? Yes.
I asked a third party. Easy. We watched several topics, and for example, health benefits. We focused on, if it's possible, when there's just one girl out of 200 students that have some health benefits, it will cost the community normally X, and now it doesn't cost. But it's a really low pronounce. It will be more, but it's really difficult to have the cost-benefit analyze. So we try to look at it on a really low level to show it €1 will be €3. And we also checked the climate issues. You can measure it out, how much water goes into the soil and what kind of problems there will not be in the surge. Is it a real English name?
Flooding.
No, the flooding? No,
flooding.
Not the flooding, also in the...
Underground water.
Yes, also, yeah, and also the floodings, etc. You can measure it out what it could be. And we try to do it on the low level. So every policymaker or politician can use it like this. But I can show you after this. I have a whole study for that in my laptop.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Yep.
Alp or Alexis, would you like to take the word next? Do you have a response, or you have questions to each other?
Alp, I'm going to jump in, because I'm actually really interested in this idea of risk and permission, and how we bring that into adult life, and how those early experiences of interacting with nature and having a vocabulary to understand our cities and our natural world impact. I'm going to start this question by prefacing the project I showed, Shoshone Park. Over the last 5 years, maybe 6, has been an absolute failure because nobody owns it. It's actually part of the city. The city will not give permission for anybody to program it or use it. So these regulations, because they're too scared of what would happen with loose parts, loose actors. I think this idea of risk goes very much into our adult life. When, as children, we're told all the things we can't do. Like, that's one of the things that drives me crazy, is constantly being told all the things I can't do. I wish people would put that same imagination into all the things we could do, right? And I guess that's a little bit like, how do we define when you need permission to use these places? I think after a disaster, a lot of people are also very hesitant to self-organize. They're waiting for that to come top down, when they could self-organize if they were encouraged. And a lot of the success stories I've heard yesterday are about encouraging middle actors, and using middle spaces for change. So doing open calls to smaller municipalities for public spaces. So I that's a kind of all over the place a bit, but I think bringing this childhood and then watching our behaviors of how we, they're public resources, they're for all of us to use. And it's always the bullies that take over, meaning like the Uber comes in and they just do it, and they don't ask permission. Why are we always asking permission? Why don't we try it? And then put regulations around it after. Why, we don't have to put regulations to foresee all the things that haven't even happened yet. And I know this from Shoshone Park. It's a disaster because everybody's trying so hard to control it that there's no control. And it just goes to decay because nobody owns, there's no stewardship, nobody takes care of it. Where if the running club was invited to just do their things every week, they would naturally make sure that it was in a good condition, right? Maybe you can talk some of that in the permission resilience.
I think it's a good question and area of to think about. I mean, I really enjoyed and I feel luckier to be in this panel because in our presentations we were all focused on maybe we should not define the space, but the space is going to design itself by the social interactions and so on, right? But there's a problem with the expectations of the authorities and expectations of the users, because actually users are not aware that they are the designers of the cities. I think what we should be focusing on is creating random interactions, because while we are defining the norms of urban life, actually people are conservative about the norms of the urban life, but these norms change through random interactions. So for me, a personal view about how to define the success of that space is how much random interaction does occur in the space. So maybe that can be a starting point to think about this challenge you have mentioned.
What I think it's also important to start before and come together with the community and discuss about values and discuss about vision. And when you organize a vision together, you can also discuss risks, etc. And also the benefits of risk. I like an example from Italy. Many children live nearby their mothers for a long time, and the mothers are taking care really good of their children. But when they go into traffic, they never learned how to be in traffic. So many children die in traffic because there's a really big gap between learning acting with risks and becoming in danger. So when you learn how to live with risks, you also know when risk ends and danger starts. So we like it to start that kind of discussion with communities also. So it's not, you don't get a really big risk or a really dirty child at home. Your child learned a lot. And I think it's also possible for the parks to discuss with each other what the vision is and why you are doing that. And also the problems like budget or regulations, etc. You can also discuss that with the community. So they understand the choices and you can collaborate in the whole process then.
Alexis, do you have your mic on?
Oh, I do have another add-on to this, sorry. I'm very interested in both cases, and I'm very interested in this topic in general, is open school grounds. We have schools actually in every neighborhood in most cities around the world. They're amazing resources. And I'm going to give two extremes of an anecdote. When I was a child growing up in Los Angeles, we had these huge school grounds. And once we became teenagers, we would spend most of our weekends breaking into them, jumping over fences, and then, the authorities would come and we would kind of get in trouble and get our hands smacked. And And it was always weird to us because we are children. This is our schools. We want to go to them. We're not doing any harm. We're actually just going to play anything. We're not doing anything nefarious. But because they put a fence up, anything we would do is naturally naughty, which was so counterintuitive to us, but also had a lot of risk. It was great to learn how to jump over fences at a young age. And then at the same time, here in Istanbul and many cities, there is a very standard school. It's put in the middle. There's a school ground around, and yet it is still fenced. And yet these are amazing assets for everybody because the elders come to take the smaller children, the families come, the older siblings come, the younger kids come. I'd just like to hear your imaginations of how we could use public school grounds both to enable resilience, community, ecology, but also micro-enterprise. My third anecdote is when I was studying markets in Australia, one of the pioneering groups was mothers wanting their children to have access to fresh food in the 80s. And they approached their schools and said, we want to have farmers markets. And so this was a self-organized cooperation between mothers and schools, and they overcame the bureaucracy. I think they didn't ask permission, but they started doing it in all the schools. So they have their farmers markets not on parking lots or other things, but in the public schools. And because it became so normalized, then the schools started adapting to provide them space, as well as more natural playgrounds for younger kids if it was in a high school, for older kids if it was a middle school. And they became these very, very vibrant gathering places for everybody to come to and meet up, especially when people have limited time. So I think that's a very interesting platform. I'd like to hear from both of you as you're working in the kind of East that has just experienced a disaster, and you are pioneering kind of that transition at a policy and
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I 100% agree with, especially in Istanbul, the school backyards are wasted open spaces for the community, especially for the children because they are really limited. But looking from the post-disaster approach is also really important because in Istanbul, we all have a designated gathering space, It's like every house has a designated gathering space, which in an earthquake scenario, we are supposed to gather in that space. And most of those gathering spaces are actually school courtyards because the open space is really limited in Istanbul. So usually most of 60% of the gathering spaces are school backyards. Having said that, I need to once again remind that people have the tendency of going to a place they already have the habit of gathering. And we never gather in a school background. It's like if you are not a student of that school, you don't have that in your urban habits. So I think that's a really good point of view, both as a vibrant public life and more opportunities for children and parents, and also as a post-disaster scenario. I think that's really important.
I see two things. When you involve the community in designing the school ground, it becomes their space. Mm-hmm. So they become the owner and take care of that space. And about disasters, I think there are many disasters. The school grounds in Paris, Barcelona, Rome, etc. They invest in the school grounds also as a shelter for elderly people. When it's really hot, elderly people can go outside nearby their houses to the school grounds and go into the shade. And it's also, when you look a bit further about some health issues, now we are talking about social structures, but also physical and mentally health will be there. Children can play, and what I see in the Netherlands, more than 30% of all children has problems with their motoric skills. And that's growing and growing. And children already have a lot of problems with their sight. They're looking on the screens and they got problems. 90% of them will have problems with their eyes. Also, at the age of 12, many children have problems in their back because of sitting inside, like people from 45 normally have. And that's at this time. Also, problems with studying. When there's a lot of heat, your brain doesn't work. And inside the school buildings, the climate is really bad. It's hot and you cannot think really good anymore. So the outdoor classroom is really healthy. And also the scores of education will grow when you invest in that topics. Also, for the teachers who work at schools, it's really important to have a good place to work. And when you have a really bad buildings with heat problems, etc., also the teachers don't work really good, and they get more motivated when they are working on a really nice green space. And when you look at a real big problem far away, that's about climate, but maybe more biodiversity. So you can also use the whole school environment as a learning landscape about biodiversity and also about food. And I like it when I see the teachers talking about food and the bees, etc., how important those little experiences for the children are to understand their future and our future. So I think many problems you can discuss on a really smart space.
Thank you so much. There was a question in the room? Yes. Are there any other questions? Okay, there's multiple questions. This gentleman, size ulaşabilirse.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I apologize a little bit for the convoluted question, but so I'm a foreigner living in Gaziantep, and therefore have experienced the earthquake in Antep. And for a foreigner, you can understand that public spaces play an important role, because being not tightly into the community, for us, like at the edge of the community as a foreigner, it's always relevant to have public spaces there where you can orient yourself around. So my question seems to be that when I look now at the post-earthquake scenarios and the way public spaces have developed in Eastern Turkey, do you think there have been some learnings in how to adapt these public spaces? Because I still live in Gaziantep, I don't see sometimes the adjustments, also the solidarity, the social capital was certainly there. It felt like for me, there's a turning point. However, I think in terms of the shape of these public spaces, in terms of how the municipalities or whoever is using it, this momentum seems to have faded away. Maybe you have some examples or maybe some reflections on what has been done in the post-earthquake scenarios with these public spaces, because I think, as you said, these are underrated points. And just one little comment there, I think planning these kind of things beforehand showed, especially in Antep, that you cannot plan. Like, things happen, then organically things develop. And I think taking the learnings from these organic adjustments of the community is so important. Yeah, sorry for the convoluted question, but maybe you got what I'm after.
Yeah. Like, first of all, I mentioned that how we use public space is also very much associated with the cultural norms. So in Gaziantep or in Hatay or generally earthquake area, the way the understanding of public space is very much different from the Istanbul or the Western ideas. So the more small-scale community courtyards and small-scale gathering spaces are more, both because of the climate and the culture of life, is more adaptable to the geography. But as I already mentioned, what has already been done is not good examples because they were not considered. Maybe I can share a little experience we had in the area that, for those who don't know what tandır is a kind of a bread oven. It's a public bread oven in the street. And those public bread ovens are usually used through the day for women to cook bread, but it's a gathering space for especially women. And they gather around the tandır, and it's a public oven. And they use it to, chat and, share problems and so on, meanwhile cooking the bread. Of course, I'm not talking about the emergency response. After some time, one of the first things people were looking for is like their problem is we don't even have a thunder in this settlement. They were saying it's not like we don't even have like better toilets. It's not we don't even have better schools. We don't even have a thunder because that's a necessity. Because that's one of the basics of social interaction with the community. So when you take the thunder out of the space, you just destroy the interface of the public interaction. So that's one of the essentials of the urban lives. As I say, it's very much associated with the culture and the practice of urban life. But the tools in Gaziantep and also the other cities affected by the disaster have characteristic public spaces which are very good starting points for the recovery process, I think.
Thank you for that. There were two more questions. Okay. Yes, if you could keep your hands up, I think the people... Yes. To this lady in the front, please, and then there's another question in the back. Mikrofonu ön tarafa ulaştırabilirseniz çok teşekkürler. Sonra arkaya uzatırsanız sevinirim. Çok teşekkürler.
Thank you for your information, all you had and experiencing. Actually, I have a question for Alexis Şanal. You talk about the potential that the marketing places and for the creating the community marketing. Actually, I think that even for a day per week, the marketing places had creating a huge mess and trash and crowd actually. And you offering this can be a more one day per week, I suppose. And this may cause a huge crowd and the noise and the security problems. How can you suggest to solve all of these?
Yeah, I think this is a very common experience of these one-day markets. And interestingly enough, anytime they take them away, the social capital and the social value to have access to affordable fresh food outweighs that inconvenience. And I think that's an important thing, is balancing some of these things. And I was thinking of your Tandoor experience because I know this is often an interesting challenge in also communities. There's this idea of modernity that has kind of come upon all of us, that the city is bureaucratic and its role is to make things easy. And that anything that doesn't do that creates this tension or is not safe. If you talk to the gendarme, there is no accidents that happen in markets. They're actually one of the safest places. They're also one of the safest places for women in the entire city, and you will never hear of somebody getting pickpocketed in a market. So perception and data are often mismatched, right? It causes a lot of traffic. Yes, but this allows everybody, again, to provide fresh food affordably and subsidized for their families, which has also made that nutrition in this country has remained pretty good given the level of income. So I think one of the things that has to be balanced, it's often the case with open school grounds, a battle I no longer try to fight in Turkey, is this idea of security. It is not insecure. People will take care of the things they care about. So there's this perception of security and the other, and if we don't create more places that allow us to interact and build that trust, we will lose that. And if we all sit in our cars and have that convenience, unfortunately, we will lose a lot too. So,
thank you.
Çekinmeyin, sonra size gelelim.
Ben Türkçe soru soracağım. Merhabalar, bütün sunumlar için teşekkürler. Benim sorum Alp Arısoy'a aslında. Diğer konuşmacılar da yanıtlayabilir. Ya sorumu çok böyle hani derinleştirmem gerekirse ben Düzceliyim ve 99 depremini çocukken yaşadım. Daha sonraki şeylerde de ailemle görüşmelerimde de şunu anladım. Afetlerden sonra, afet öncesi bildiğiniz şehir tamamen yerle bir oluyor ve çocukken hatırlıyorum, yani kaybolduğumu hatırlıyorum. Yani sokakları, oynadığım sokaklar, her yer bitmişti ve böyle yer duygumu kaybetmiştim, yer yön duygumu. Hem fiziksel olarak hem duygusal olarak. Dolayısıyla kamusal alanlar hafızaların da hani yerleştiği, orada büyüdüğü yerler. Dolayısıyla bu kamusal alanlarda afetlerden sonra tekrar o yer duygusunu edinmek, işte Hatay'ı biliyoruz, tekrardan kültürü yerleştirebilmek adına yerel yönetimler burada neler yapabilir, STK'lar neler yapabilir, özellikle çocuklar söz konusu olduğunda tamamen bağınızı koparabiliyorsunuz o şehirle. Ve benim tek hatırladığım, yani Düzce'den sonra göç ettik ve döndüğümde de tek şey yaptım. Afet sonrası büyük bir parkta kalmıştık. Tek hatırladığım ve duygusal bir bağ gerçekleştirdiğim yer orası oldu. Dolayısıyla afet veya büyük krizlerden sonra insanların yer duygusunu kaybetmesi ve sonra tekrar oraya bağlanması için veya yani o kültürü devam ettirmek için neler yapılabilir? Hem fiziksel hem sosyolojik olarak. Çok teşekkür ederim.
Ben Türkçe mi İngilizce mi cevap? Türkçe cevap vereyim. Ben depremi hiçbir zaman yerinde yaşamadım. Ne Hatay'da, ne Düzce'de, ne Gölcük'te. Hep uzaktan. O yüzden sizin yaşadığınız deneyim bizim için çok öğretici, uzaktan bakanlar için. Keza bu süreçte de benzer şekilde siz geçici yerleşim alanında yaşamış mıydınız prefabrik evlerde hiç? Yani burada yaşadığı deneyim yaşayan insanlarla yaptığımız görüşmeler bizim için çok.
The people with this experience, it was really, there were really nice takeaways. It is impossible to make 100% empathy, that's right, but we have a lot to learn from your experience, especially the childhood is really important because you remember as a child you did not have any containers. They say that there were no place to play. They were searching a place to play. So there is a kind of lack of belongingness, but we can construct it. We can construct this belongingness. This belonging. You can also construct a 3-meter square place, a small place in these temporary houses because we have memories. The memories are very rarely associated with buildings, with structures. It's about our memories. We can find other tools and other places. We can have some small secure places in these temporary housing places in order to restore this emotion. So design cannot create a belonging, yes, but we can create interfaces which make which can grow this emotion of belonging.
Would you like to add to that?
I'd only like to add that I thought Alp made a really good point that community making is so fundamental to that healing process too. That those patterns in daily life, getting the tandoor back, that the spaces you're creating, and I think that's in the post-recovery we often talk about rebuilding. And you can never rebuild the kind of texture that was there, but if some of the focus can be on the rebuilding the community assets and those kind of patterns of experience, there's a lot to be had there. And I was thinking more about the market question that way. One of the reasons people really like going to the markets is they know the person they're buying their produce from, and they talk to them and they trust them, and that person tells them when it's fresh or not fresh. And that sense of accountability, not in a kind of, in a way that is actually building those social networks, as well as it comes a place, I need this to happen, I need a new service, or I'm trying to find somebody to do something. Those spaces become those informal, impromptu spaces to have those conversations And lots of people are introducing, oh, you have to go see so-and-so over there. They've just got that going. So I think I think that's a really interesting part of your takeaway from working in those guidelines is community building.
Buraya mikrofon alabilir miyiz?
Bu güzel deneyimleri bizimle paylaştıkları için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Benim sorum Yan Bey'e, büyük kentlerde karşılaştığımız en büyük sorunlardan bir tanesi dava açma süreçleri biliyorsunuz. Bir çocuk zarar gördüğü zaman bir oyun alanında ailesi direkt dava açma yoluna gidiyor. Bu şehir büyüdükçe galiba sayıları daha da artıyor bu davaların. Okul alanlarında yaptığınız bu çalışmalar sonrasında bu gibi sorunlarla karşılaşıldı mı? Bu işten sorumlu, bu riskten sorumlu olan bir kurum var mıydı? Bu benim direkt sizin sunumunuz sonrasında aklıma gelen şeydi ama projeler çok güzeldi. Gerçekten ufuk açıcıydı. Teşekkür ediyorum.
Yes, of course, we have to take care of the regulation, but we are looking for the borders, and in the whole process we are looking for the benefits for children, and we are also looking where the boundaries are. And we discuss also, we are safe in between of the regulations, but we are not afraid for the regulations. So, and what I also like, and there's also a difference between real public spaces like parks and school grounds. In school grounds, there's always a professional organization who is looking at the space. So that's also really important for me to work with the school grounds. And the other way, you can fix everything in the regulations. So we let certificate everything. But what I think is more important, we also process the whole maintenance every day, every week, every month. So we organize in the whole designing process also the regulations with a risk analysis. And we share the risk analysis with the teachers and the parents, so they understand what risks are really good for the children, but also when they have to do something. And that's more easy with school grounds, and with parks it's more difficult when you ask people from the neighborhood to take care of that. But I think it's really good possible, but you have to write down what your vision is, and you have to write down what the regulations are, and you have to write down what you are doing to take care on the process. Not once a year checking the regulations, for example. And that's what we are doing. But it's still a difficult part. And also, I gave this example of Rotterdam. We have a lot of discussion with people inside the municipality. Some people understand the view and now they work like this way, and when there is a new one, we also have to discuss this thing inside the municipality. And we also signed contracts with the school. Some parts the municipality is responsible for, and the daily things, the school can organize that. So the big responsibilities are for the municipality and the small ones for the school.
Çok teşekkürler. Thank you all for this lovely conversation and wonderful and inspiring presentations. Gregors, do you want to add a word or two?
I'm just, mostly looking at Alp and said there must be a ton of policy papers to be written to our public spaces that we need to incorporate, so spaces can adopt some of all of these new inputs. But that's a long discussion. But I hope there is something that can be taken into consideration for planners in the future. But I think that's not the closing remark, but that's on you, Selva.
Bize katıldığınız için çok teşekkür ederiz. Bu sabah kamusal alanları farklı perspektiflerden konuşmak istedik sizlerle. Sorularınız için çok teşekkürler. Biz bir 10 dakika daha bu odadayız. Daha fazla konuşmak isterseniz bekleriz. Sonrasında da saat 11.30'da tekrar bu atölye için burada olacağız. Çok teşekkürler. Çok teşekkürler Alexis, Ian, Alp. Çok teşekkürler.